Hello, I'm Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts. I'm the Director of Corporate Contracts. I'm an international consultant and trainer in the area of procurement and contracts. I'm also asked to speak at international procurement conferences, and I'm also the author of the Contract Matters books, which there is a series which can be found on my website. Hello and welcome. My name is Margaret Gilbert of Corporate Contracts Management Limited. Today's topic is focusing on buyer procurement, especially in relation to contract management. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy this video. And I would like to introduce Tricia Corley, who's joining us today.
Thank you, Margaret.
Welcome. So procurement surrounding buyers is an interesting topic and something that causes confusion. And contract management is often a forgotten part of procurement, but it's important in terms of relationship, performance and reporting.
So which of those three are the most important?
Performance is key, and the relationship will go much better if performance is happening, because there'll be less stress in the relationship. The contract is the defining document, which is sometimes what's forgotten. The relationship is secondary, so in any kind of a legal interpretation, it will always be what the contract says. Performance is key.
So the contract has to be quite specific in terms of what the buyer is expecting the supplier to do?
Yes.
And then where there is poor performance, it's always measured against the contract?
Correct. Right. Because any contract should have, and I mentioned should, sometimes it doesn't, but should, in terms of have what's called KPIs, key performance indicators, that basically states what is required of the supplier through the term of the contract. And so performance generally will be measured against the KPIs.
So the performance obviously becomes a point of discussion at regular meetings between the buyer and supplier?
Correct.
And who would normally raise a flag about performance? Would that be the buyer, or would maybe there be some signs before that by the supplier, like late delivery or non-payment or something?
It will probably be raised by the buyer, who will be paying attention, or should be paying attention, and will be raised by the buyer. And those issues that you just raised about sort of deliveries not happening, etc., will soon be seen as not happening. So the buyer will bring it to the attention of the supplier and just ask for a clarification as to why this is occurring, especially if it's a one-off. If it's a one-off, that's a little different than if it's an ongoing poor performance.
Right, so there's a time process.
There's a time process, yeah. Not only is there a time process, there is what's called a time to fix as well. So it's a time frame in which something has to happen to make changes and for performance to be back on track. Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's really where the relationship would come in. Correct. As to how that performance conversation would be managed. Yep.
The relationship will only happen, and work has to be put into that relationship, which is why the monthly get-togethers and the monthly meetings are often relationship focused, so that if there is an issue, then it's easy for the two parties to have a conversation with each other. If you're only meeting once or twice a year, then it's not probably too easy to pick up the phone and sort of say, hey, we've got a problem here. In terms of performance meetings, they are separate from the monthly meetings, and they're held, well, it depends on what's agreed to, but usually about twice a year.
So all that's documented in the contract? Documented
in the contract. Right. And those twice yearly meetings are focused primarily on just performance. Mm-hmm.
I see. So the relationship, while it might be secondary to the contract, actually still is quite important for there to be a good relationship between the buyer and the supplier.
Yep. It depends on the situation. If you're building a bridge, you don't really need a great relationship as long as the supplier can build the bridge. But if it's going to be a very much intensive type and going to be a regular sort of needing to communicate and work together, etc., then the relationship is important.
What other benefits come out of a relationship between a buyer and supplier?
Well, it allows other aspects to kick in, such as collaboration. and been working together to perhaps look at more options than what was originally thought about. But and usually those two things will not kick in anyway until the contract has been going for a little while, and it can be seen that there is sort of it's working well, and then there'll be the issues about collaboration. Not all procurement can work in terms of collaboration, especially if it's just transactional type of things. But if you're looking at transformational type procurement and over a long period of time, then collaboration is key.
So the supplier should be able to meet with the buyer and this is where the openness from the procurement principles comes in, where they have got a relationship sufficient for them to trust one another, where the supplier can come in with some good ideas or some intellectual property, and maybe the buyer could say, well, come and share some of our resources or space or what have you. You're talking about that kind of collaboration?
I am. And maybe it could be a case of sharing resource, sharing space or anything such as that. Or just sort of working, perhaps adding extra to the relationship or to the contractual obligations by adding some extra pieces to the mix, and so being able to collaborate that way. And it can work really well. Sometimes it's a good idea from the buyer side of things is to perhaps have an alternative to that if it doesn't work very well. You don't want to lose the whole lot, so it could be a case of sort of having a bit of an exit plan for some of it, not for all of it.
All of the contract, yeah. So really that's where the buyer would be starting to notice that some of the things that are in the contract aren't working for either party, and so there would need to be a discussion around how to manage that process and make it work better.
And sometimes the poor performance is not necessarily always the supplier fault. It could be something that the buyer side is doing that is stopping them to be able to do the best they can. So that comes back to the relationship again, and having a conversation and sort of saying, well, actually, I'm unable to do my bit because you are doing A, B and C, so can we work that through? And you often find then that then the performance will pick up again and will be absolutely fine.
So it's not just about the buyer noticing poor performance, it's also about the supplier having the courage to step into that area and say, actually, can we look at this and see what we can do? And
the courage is needed to be there. Sometimes it isn't. And then it just becomes sort of a bit of a frigid type relationship in terms of both sides not wanting to be as open, as honest as they can be or should be. And that's a shame.
Yeah, that becomes difficult.
It does become difficult.
At the end of the day, relationship is the oil that all these things run on.
That's right.
So even though the contract needs to be specific, etc., at the end of the day, it's the relationship that helps things work.
True. But saying that is that if poor performance continues and it goes down a track such as mediation or arbitration or leads to termination, the relationship isn't going to cut it. It's going to come down to the fact of whether they perform to the contract or not. And of course, the buyer will be keeping notes of what is happening along the way.
Because the contract rules.
And any arbitrator or mediator will go by the words.
Yeah.